Well, what was his vision? Did he have a vision? Well, he tried to articulate a vision for this piece in a number of times. He wrote some magazine articles, he wrote some other things. I think the best description of it is in a letter he wrote to a friend, where he said, I'd like to write of the melting pot, of New York City itself, with its blend of native and immigrant strains. This would allow for many kinds of music, black and white, Eastern and Western, and would call for a style that would achieve out of this diversity an artistic unity. New York is a meeting place, he wrote. It's a rendezvous of the nations. I'd like to catch the rhythms of these interfusing peoples and show them clashing and blending. That's an extraordinary statement. That's really a great vision, if you think about it. I'd like to create out of this diversity, out of American diversity, out of all these different people here in America, I'd like to create out of this diversity an artistic unity. What does that mean? I think that means something very concrete. It's not simply a vague statement of, well, it sort of sounds American and that's great. I think it's much, much more specific. And I think it's also interesting that, sometimes in the academy, we think we've just discovered that America is a multicultural place. You see all these courses about it and everything, and think, oh, that's great. As if somehow we just woke up and said, hey, look at this, there's all these different people here. Who would have known? Well, this is really, of course, a great, aspect of American culture, American life, and our politics, and our social life, and our culture. And in music, it's Gershwin who really tackles this theme. It might seem odd that nobody did before that, but that's a whole nother lecture. Because he really is about the first composer that really, in a systematic and sustained way, tried to make sense out of American diversity as a way to create an artistic unity. Well, what did he have to go on? First of all, he's interested in popular music. He's not the kind of classical composer that looks down on popular music and says, well, there's nothing there for me. He loves it. He's trying to break into it. He's about to make a fortune in it. This is what he loves. But just as now, even back then, there was not just one kind of American popular music. So as you know now, if you say, what's American popular music? Well, that depends on, your age, race, your group, where you live. There's 20 different lists. You look at Billboard, and there's about 52 different lists of different types of music, and each type has its own little clique, its own little group. And it was not quite as segmented back then, but already back then in the 20s, you had different styles of American popular music that were listened to by different audiences. So, for example, you already had some blues. And while all Americans today know what the blues is, or at least has a general sense of what it sounds like, back then, that was music that was mostly listened to by African Americans. The records that recorded blues were called race records. They were marketed mostly in the North, in areas where African Americans lived. And only the hipper whites would sort of know about it. Gershwin, of course, knew about it. But it was not mainstream in the larger culture. There was, coming from more on the European side influence, there was, of course, show music and Broadway music. There was both the older style of Broadway music that was very European in flavor, but there was already beginning this new kind of musical that Gershwin actually helped to create, but really he was following the footsteps of Jerome Kern, and who practically invented sort of the American musical with instead of the fairy tales and the princesses and the European counts and the Merry Widow and all that kind of thing, there are more young people falling in and out of love in silly situations, like a typical kind of musical comedy. And that kind of style of music, which was mostly a white audience, and of course that is in fact the world Gershwin is trying to break into. He knew that world very, very well. There was also a style of music back then that was already old and already had different styles branching out from it, called ragtime. Ragtime by the 20s was sometimes called Dixieland. It was sometimes called stride piano, and it was a whole nother style of music that people, and that did have some crossover appeal. That was listened to by both blacks and whites. And then there was country music already. That was one style Gershwin didn't touch. He wasn't, I can't think of a single song he wrote, with the possible exception of Biding My Time from Girl Crazy, that has a little country flavor. That that didn't interest him. But then there was also already what we would call today maybe Latino music, music from the islands, from South America, from Central America. Gershwin called that music Cuban music, because that's where he went to hear it. He would go to Cuba a lot, and he used to call that style Cuban music. So all these styles of music are floating around. They all have different audiences. Very few people would like them all. Hardly anybody would know them all. Each style had their own adherents, and it's going to be Gershwin's vision to pull them together. What he's really going to try to do is to pull all those styles together into one piece of music. And so that will be the unity. That one piece of music will be the unity, the unified vision that's going to hold all these different melodies that are going to be representative of these different popular styles that are in the culture. So as I go through this piece, I hope that'll become clear. You sort of hear that these different styles of music, these different popular styles, are going to get put together into one unified composition.